Ladies and gentlemen, the show we've all been waiting for. Paranormal Buzz Radio is proud to present REP Paranormal and Friends with your hosts, Kim Purvis and Allison Robinson. Live every Thursday night on Spreaker, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central, 5 Pacific. Be sure to check out their Facebook page, REP Paranormal Busters.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of Paranormal Buzz Radio or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is strictly prohibited. For information on everything Paranormal Buzz Radio has to offer, visit our website, paranormalbuzzradio.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Listener discretion is advised.
All right, everybody, welcome to another night of REP Paranormal and Friends. We come to you with a special guest. He is an award-winning film and TV producer and writer, and he's also the author of Forever in My Veins. So please welcome Lionel Friedberg to the show.
Hi, guys. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I'm very intrigued by all these things that you have done. So why don't you kind of give us a little bit of background on yourself? How did you get into film, TV, and writing?
Yeah, it's a long story, and I'll try and condense it so that it doesn't get out of hand.
That's okay.
You know, I grew up in South Africa, right? And when I was a child, apartheid, which is the strict racial division that existed in that country, was alive and well in all its ugliness. And, you know, I was exposed to that as a child. And I was an only child. And for a while, when I just before I started school, we lived in a small town just to the east of Johannesburg, which is where the big international airport is now. And as we all did, all white families, you know, we had servants and I had a nanny who took care of me during the day because both my parents worked. And one day she had a day off and she said to me, "I'm going to visit a friend today. You want to come along with me?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, fantastic." I must have been about 6 years old or thereabouts. And so we walked down the road. And I observed, you know, apartheid at work. You know, a police van, there was a black person walking on the other side of the street. The police van came to a screeching halt, you know, and they got out of the van, the cops, and they said to this black guy, you know, "Sure, have you got your papers on you?" You know, it was straight out of like a World War II, you know, espionage drama. And this poor man had to dig into his jacket and produce what was known as a passbook. If he didn't have a passbook that was up to date, he was arrested on the spot. And,
wow.
And that's what happened to this guy. And I said to my nanny, you know, "Why did they do that?" And she said, "Shh, don't even ask any questions." And we just kept walking along. Anyway, we went down the road and she went to see her friend. And her friend lived in the same kind of conditions that my nanny did in the backyard of the house in a tiny little room. There was a little bathroom on the side with a toilet and cold water, no hot water at all, no electricity. And when we got to her friend's little room at the back, you know, her friend invited us in. And when I went inside her room, there was the most extraordinary smells that I'd never smelled in my life before. You know, like really weird, otherworldly smells, and it was strange. And on her walls, all around her room, all these shelves with little containers and bottles and jars and powders and pebbles and all sorts of weird things. And there were a couple of dried, you know, skins up on the wall from lizards and snakes and and beads. And I said to her, "What is all this?" And she said to me, her English was good. She said, "Because I am a doctor." And I thought, what? You're a doctor? Like, what do you do? The doctor that I knew arrived at our house with a black bag and a white coat. You know?
Oh, right. Yeah.
A stethoscope around his neck. And she explained to me that she was in touch with the spirit world. And when people, in other words, other black folk who lived in the neighborhood, came to her with a problem, money that was lost, an illness that they couldn't understand, you know, a death in the family, whatever, they would come to her. And she said to me, and you know how I can find out what is wrong with those people or how I can help them? This is what I use. And she picked up this little bag and she shook it. There was a little animal skin bag. And on the floor was a grass mat. And she said, pick it up. And I did. And she said, shake it. And I did. And went clink, clink, clink. Sounded like marbles or something inside. And she said, now turn it upside down, which I did. And all these bones, these little tiny, like chicken-sized bones, and pebbles and dice and various odds and ends, you know, bottle tops, all sorts of weird things, fell onto the grass mat. And she said, now, the way these things have fallen on the mat, the ancestors have made them fall in that pattern. And I can tell what they mean.
Oh, wow.
And I said, like, what? And she said, well, I'll give you an example. She looked and she said, yeah, you are an only child. Yes, your father does this kind of work. You know, she kind of described something about myself, which made me suddenly realize this woman knew what she was talking about. And that was that. You know, she packed them away, and those two women nattered away for about an hour, and eventually we went home. So that was my introduction to what we used to call witch doctors. Which was a disparaging term that whites used for black people who did this kind of healing. Today we call them traditional healers, of course.
Right. Yes.
And many years later, my folks moved away from South Africa. They moved into what was a British colony right in the heart of Central Africa called Northern Rhodesia. It was right at the southern border of the Congo. My father took a job up there as a manager of, he was a watchmaker by trade. And he took a job as a manager of a little jewelry store and a watchmaker. And I had finished my education. I'd finished high school. And I said, I'm going with you. And my mother said, no, you're not. You're going to go to university. But I didn't want to do that because what I wanted to do more than anything else in my life was to make movies. I had fallen in love with all the Tarzan movies and all the movies that were set in Africa. You know, I don't know if folks are aware of the fact that there were great movies at the time, King Solomon's Mines, The African Queen, all of that stuff. I wanted to make movies like that. Yeah. And I said, no, I'm coming with you because I had this ridiculous dream that if I went to that part of the world, I could make movies up there. And I'd have a little movie camera. Now, these were long before the days of video, of course. This was film. I used to make films for my friends' birthday parties and whatever else. And I thought, here's my opportunity. So I followed them to Central Africa. And lo and behold, like sort of manna out of heaven, one day in the local newspaper in this copper mining community where my father was working, I saw an ad for staff for a new television station that was opening up. It was the first television station in Central Africa. And I thought, oh, my word, this is for me. And I went to the door and I knocked as hard as I could. And I said, guys, you've got to let me in. I need a job. And they said, what can you do? And I said, anything you want me to do. Now, I've got absolutely no experience at all. I was a kid, you know, just finished high school. And they gave me a job in the props department, which lasted virtually 6 months, because after that I went to the studio manager and I said to him, you know, why don't you give me a chance behind one of those cameras in the studio, see how I can do. And he said, all right, when we do a rehearsal for the live show this afternoon, we'll give you a chance. And I did. I got behind that camera and I was good. Because remember, I'd been making movies ever since I was a little 13-year-old boy. And so I got a job as a cameraman. And that's how my career began, in the middle of Central Africa, the very first television station. Wow. And that was the road that led to my career. I mean, it basically led me eventually to LA and to work here in Hollywood, which is what I always wanted to do.
Right, yeah.
But in 1964, something happened. And that was that Northern Rhodesia, this British colony, got its independence from Britain and was going to become the Republic of Zambia. And when that happened, the government decided, now the black government that was taking over the country from the Brits, said, okay, we are going to nationalize the television station and put black people in there. You know, we need local people to run the place. You whites have done your job, but it's time out.
Yes.
You got to go. We all understood that, and you know, it made perfect sense. But I was really upset because I didn't know what was going to happen to me. What was going to happen to my career? So we had a very nice guy, a young guy who wasn't very much older than me, who worked for us at home. And I went to him the next day and I said, David, a terrible thing has happened. I've been asked to leave in 6 months' time. I've got to leave and I don't know what to do. I don't really want to go back to South Africa, you know, because of apartheid and all the rest of it.
Right.
Although South Africa had a bustling film industry even then. And so this guy, David, said to me, he was a member of the Bemba tribe, which is the predominant tribe in the area. And he said to me, don't worry, I will find someone who can help you make up your mind what you should do. And I said, like who? And he said, don't worry, leave it to me. Well, I trusted the guy implicitly because he often came into the bush with me with my camera, taking pictures of, you know, tribal life and stuff like that. And on the appointed day, there we were, he and I in my little beat-up VW Beetle going along this dirt road. We got to this little village on the outside of the town where I was living, and there was a hut at the very end, and he said, that's the place. I think that's where she is. And I said, who is it, David? And he said, wait, you'll see. You know, I had no idea what I was in for. And he went to this little hut and he knocked on the door, and this ancient little woman arrived. She was half blind, bent over, wearing a big sort of heavy rug over her shoulders. It was a summer's day, as hot as can be. And she beckoned us in with a sort of bony finger, you know, like straight out of Hansel and Gretel.
Oh, gosh.
And so we went inside her hut. There were like 2 rooms. And in the front room was a grass mat, and on the mat was one of these little bags, this animal skin bag. And on the walls were jars of this strange stuff. And I suddenly had this, you know, this recognition from my childhood. Oh, this is what I saw as a kid, decades ago, you know. I recognized these smells. She must be a healer like that woman was that I met that day with my nanny. And that's exactly what she was. She was a professional healer. That's why David had taken me to her. And she said to me, throw the bones. And I took the bag, and she said, first you blow into it and you say your name, which I did. And now you turn the bag upside down, which I did. And all these bones and strange things fell onto the mat. And she leaned over the mat like this, and she started to stare at the pattern of that they made on the mat, all these objects. And she looked up at me and she clapped her hands like this. And she said, I can't see anything. What are all these bright lights shining in my face? You know, she was talking Bemba, so David was translating for me. She couldn't speak any English. And when David said she wants to know what these very bright lights are that are shining in her face, I thought, oh, my word, she's seen the lights of the television station. She's seen studio lights. This lady's for real. You better pay attention to what she has to say.
Yeah.
You know what? And I said to David, I said, yeah, that's where I work. It's a TV station. She didn't have a television set. She didn't have electricity. So I don't know if she knew what television was.
Right.
And then she proceeded to basically foretell my entire life.
Oh, wow.
This was back in 1964. And you know, what's that, 60 odd years ago?
Right.
Everything that woman told me has come true. How many kids I would have 2 marriages, the fact that I would one day cross she called it the big water. Now, Zambia is a landlocked country. It's not near the ocean. She'd never seen the ocean in her life. And she said I was going to cross the big water, and she pointed towards the north, that direction, she said. And she said to me, I will go there, and my career will go to a place where there are more lights like she sees in the bones.
Oh.
A lot of famous people, and she said that's where you'll eventually end up. And she basically told me all kinds of things, but she told me a lot of strange things that I didn't understand. Like she said to me, some of this was right, like terrifying. She said to David, one day he must be very careful. He'll be in the bush, and there'll be this beast, and this great beast might kill him.
Oh my gosh.
He said to him things like, and one day he will be on the big water, and he must be very careful because the big water will try to take his life. I don't know what any of the stuff meant. And one of the strangest things that she said to him was, one day in his life, he will meet a man who knew, and she held up her fingers like this, which in the African paradigm means very close. He will meet a man who was very close to the most evil person who ever lived. That sounded really scary.
Scary, yeah.
So she makes all these statements.
Right.
You know, as my life unfolded, I understood what she meant because all of these things came true. Another thing she said to me was, one day he will go to a place where there is no color at all. There's only white, no color. And I thought, what is she talking about? It's like a dreamscape. Where is that?
Yeah.
Well, you know, in 1990, I went to the Antarctic to make a film for PBS.
Yes, yeah.
And I was sitting on the deck of the ship one night. It wasn't night because it was in the southern hemisphere, and it was in December, so the sun it never really set. You know, it sort of touched the horizon, then came up again. So I was sitting it was Christmas Eve, and the captain had stopped the ship, and everywhere he was partying on board the ship. This icebreaker, the scientists and the crew and everything, that I was making my notes, and I was thinking, how do I describe this place where I am? And the thought that came to me was, it's a world without color. It's a pure white world. And it suddenly hit, oh my God, that's what she told me. She even foresaw that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So this woman was extraordinary, and you know, that is the first time I encountered the capabilities of these traditional healers. Mm-hmm. In South Africa, they call them sangomas, which basically mean, you know, people who can see into another dimension. I have met many since then, and they have all been unbelievably amazing. And I decided, you know, to write a book about that and write a book about my experiences. It's not really about me, but about this paradigm that these people follow is so extraordinary and so outside of our sphere of, you know, of understanding, that I just had to share it with the world, which is why I wrote this book.
Yes. Very good. Yeah. You brought up some of those points, because when you were talking about that, I did read about that. And the one that was the scariest person, wasn't that like Adolf Hitler's sister or something to that extent, or something like that? Yeah. That just blew my mind.
It's exactly right. I was doing a series of documentaries on the history of aviation in Southern Africa. I was still living in South Africa at the time. The year was 82 or 83. And I was doing a history of South African Airways, which is one of the world's oldest international airlines, by the way. And it's terrific. It was a terrific airline and still is. And I was doing a series of documentaries for television about its 50th anniversary. Mm-hmm. And in doing research for this particular project, we found out that in the 1930s, the airline had bought 3 new aircraft from a German factory, the Junkers factory in Germany, which was a big aircraft manufacturer at the time in the 30s. This was before the Second World War. And the flight of those aircraft from the factories in Bremen, or wherever the factory was, down the whole length of Africa was a major deal at that time. You know, there was no weather forecasting. There was no emergency airfields. You know, fuel was far and few. If the aircraft came down, who would find people? You know, so it was a big deal to fly down Africa at that time. And one of the pilots of one of the delivery flights of one of those aircraft, we found through our research that he was still alive. And I thought, wow, we got to put him in the movie. We've got to get him in the movie. We've got to interview him for the movie. So it turned out that he was retired and living near Munich in Bavaria, in Germany. He was like 89 years old. And I said, well, when we do the German part of our filming, we've got to interview this guy.
Right.
So comes the time for us to interview the man. We go to his house, a charming little picture book house with hollyhocks outside, a neat little path, you know, typical Bavarian house. And it was his third wife that he was married to, who opened the door, and she didn't speak any English, but she was as sweet as can be. And, you know, she invited us inside, and we went in there, and I had a man from the German Foreign Office as our translator who facilitated this whole interview. And, you know, the night before we actually went to go and meet this man, whose name was Hans Baur, B-A-U-R, very famous pilot. The man from the Foreign Office said to me, how much do you really know about this man? And I said, well, you know, why? What are you implying? What is there really to know about him? I know he flew this delivery flight. He probably had a war record with the Luftwaffe, which is understandable during the war. Why? What else is there to know? And he said to me, He was Adolf Hitler's personal pilot.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I thought, how am I going to? I've interviewed a lot of people in my time. How am I going to handle this one? This is something. This is right. This is out of the ordinary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we go to this house. We meet the man. He's as charming as can be, and he didn't speak any English. So the interview was conducted in German through this man from the Foreign Office. I asked the questions. He, rephrased them in German, and the guy answered. And of course, we dubbed his voice later on and put subtitles on and so on. And when the interview was done, I said to him, "Danke schön, thank you very much. We're done." And he clapped his hands and he says to his wife, "Bring the drinks and bring the food." And they laid on this huge feast for my crew and the stills photographers and everybody else who were part of the unit who were with me that day. And then he said to me, "I want to show you something." And he got up. He had a bad leg. He had a war injury and in his leg, so he sort of limped. And he took me around the corner, and there was this big photograph on the wall of him in front of one of these airplanes that we've been talking about in the interview. And in the photograph right next to him is Adolf Hitler.
Oh,
and
my gosh.
He says to me, "Do you want to know about this?" In German. I knew enough about it. He said, and I said, "Ja, bitte, I would like to." And he said, "Kommen Sie mit me." And we went back into the living room. We sat on the couch in the living room. We poured big drinks, and he said to the wife, "Bring the photograph albums." And she went upstairs and came back with all these big leather-bound photograph albums. Well, I tell you, he opened these albums, and it was like looking at a picture book record of the history of the Third Reich and Hitler's world. It was incredible. And so, all the names that people are familiar with, Goebbels and Himmler and on and on and on, they were all in these images with this guy, and he was always seen with Adolf Hitler. He and Adolf Hitler were buddies.
Oh, my
Hitler
goodness.
gave him his first wedding party in Hitler's personal apartment in Munich. That's how close they were.
Oh, wow.
And it was extraordinary because, as he told me all of these stories, I wasn't being judgmental towards the guy at all. I wasn't thinking of him as the enemy. I was thinking as a pilot.
Uh-huh.
But he was very, very close to all of those people, and one of them a very, very close buddy of Adolf Hitler. And it was only at the end of the day when I said to the crew, "Let's wrap up, let's get up, all the cables cleared, we're out of here, we're done." And the sun was going down, and as we were driving away from his house, I looked through the rear window of the van, and there he was outside with his wife waving goodbye to us. And only then it suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. Do you realize that you were a handshake away from Adolf Hitler? Talk about 6 degrees of separation.
Right.
This is 1 degree of separation from the most evil man who ever lived. And it was only at that point that I suddenly realized this woman foresaw that. This dear old lady living in the heart of Central Africa foretold that, It was amazing.
That is absolutely, and she had some other things that she told you too, didn't she? Didn't she tell you about an illness too?
Yes, she did. She told me that one day I would become very ill, and that if I needed healing, the only way I would get proper healing is to go back to the place where I was born. That's her words. So, we're talking about the mid-90s now. I was diagnosed with a pretty bad chronic kidney disease, and it was pretty serious. I had no idea that I had this, and it was it just came out of the blue. And my nephrologist, one of the top nephrologists in LA, he said to me, "We don't understand why you've got this. Did you ever get stung by an insect? Were you ever bitten in the?" I said, "Yeah, all those things. I was a documentary filmmaker. All of those things happened to me. I swam in filthy rivers. I even smoked elephant dung once when I ran out of."
I wonder if that had a pleasing taste to it or smell.
When you're out of tobacco, anything tastes good if it burns, right? I've given up smoking, but those days I was So, it was just the most extraordinary thing. So, she just, how this woman could foresee all of this, I still have absolutely no clue. But it explained to me by another friend of mine who is a surgeon, and he said, your illness could be caused from various reasons. And this guy, this friend of mine, the surgeon, was also born in South Africa. He's the same age as me, and he lives not far from where I live here in California. He lives up the road in Santa Barbara, where Prince Harry and Meghan now make their home.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a practice there. And he said to me, I am studying the ways of the African shaman because I want to know why some of the herbs and stuff that these folks go and use, they get it out of the boondocks. They go into the bush and bring back leaves and sticks and, stuff. And it heals people. And we don't understand why. People who are trained in Western medicine. So I'm studying their methods, and I want to become, a Sangoma. I want to understand how the Sangoma's methodology works. I'm going to South Africa at the end of the year. We're talking about 1994, 95. Into South Africa at the end of the year to study this system. Why don't you come with me? Make a film about that, and you can meet some of these healers that I'm going to meet. Maybe they can help you. I said, Dave, you are a surgeon, and you're telling me that I've got to go to a witch doctor to find out what's wrong with me? And he said, yes, it's exactly what I'm saying to you. They know more than we know. So I went with him, and I met a lot of really fascinating people. And the very, very first one that I met, once I got back to South Africa, the Sangoma, was a very, very sweet lady who lived just off Johannesburg. There's a huge area there where during the apartheid era, blacks had to live in that area. They couldn't live in Johannesburg itself. And we went to her house, and she threw the bones for me. And the minute she threw the bones, she clapped her hands, which is almost a sign of respect or sympathizing. So sorry. I'm so sorry. I said, why? She said, because you are very ill. You are very ill. And I said, yeah. I didn't tell her about the illness. And she said, yeah, you've got a problem with your organs. And she said, I think it is your kidneys. And how did she know that, And so I met a number of people. Eventually, in the course of meeting these people, one of the healers that I met said to me that I need to undergo a FEMBA, FEMBA. Now, that is a Zulu Swazi word, which means exorcism.
Oh, yes, I did read about that. Yeah.
And I thought, you are kidding me. What? And they said, yes. And, of course, I was with my surgeon friend, and he said, don't argue with him. Do it. Well, I did do it. And we were in – the country used to be called Swaziland. Now it's called Eswatini. And it's a mountain kingdom bordering South Africa, absolutely magnificent part of the world. And I went to meet a healer there who spoke also no English at all. And this guy was unbelievable. It was as scary as I couldn't describe to you how scary it was. I describe it in the book. I was sitting inside this big hut. There were a lot of people around me beating drums. And there was just a fire in the middle of the hut, with smoke going out in a little hole in the middle of the roof, thatched roof. This guy arrived. He was dressed in all of his Sangoma beads and a grass skirt. I mean, typical. It was straight out of Indiana Jones.
Oh, my gosh.
And his eyes were bloodshot and red as though he'd been smoking something really serious. It wasn't about that. The guy had taken on another personality.
Oh, wow.
He had become, and the only animal that I can think of to describe the way he behaved was a hyena, because the minute he came into the hut, he dropped onto his hands and knees, and he came crawling up to me. And, his back was arched up exactly like a hyena walks.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was grunting, It was a scare. I can't tell you how terrified I was. And he started to smell me all the way from my feet, all the way up. And when he got to my kidney area, he started to heave. He started to belch.
Oh, my gosh.
Called one of his assistants, and the assistant came and had a little barrel there. And he vomited into this barrel.
Oh, my gosh.
And then he went to the other side of my body to where my other kidney was. He smelled again, and he starts to heave again. And again, he vomits into this barrel. And at the end of this whole session, which scared the daylights out of me, He stood up and he said to me, I have taken the dark stuff out of your body because it is in your kidneys. I've taken the dark stuff out, and this is what you have to do. And he told me various things that I have to do and medications that I have to take in order to cure myself. But I think that session was the tipping point that actually saved my life.
Oh, wow.
He ingested my illness and got rid of it. I mean, it's just, my friend Dave, who was studying to become the surgeon, said, I've never seen anything quite as dramatic as that. He said, that is extraordinary. The fact that a guy actually got to your kidneys and did this proves he wasn't joking. He was doing something to you that I cannot explain. So, I've written about all this stuff. I wanted to share this with folks because it's so amazing.
Yes. Now, have you tried practicing any of this yourself, like any shamanism or anything like that? Have you tried to practice it or anything? Or,
it takes years and years and years for those folks to learn their craft, to learn it at the feet of usually an elderly person who is a practitioner and been practicing it for years and years and years and years and years. And it's only if this person accepts you as what they call not a quetta. There's a Zulu word for it that escapes me now, but a student. If they accept you as a student, your training lasts years, or you can do that stuff. So I wouldn't be presumptuous to think that I could even remotely do anything that they did. I mean, yes, I do have odds and ends. My study, my office here at home, is filled with little rocks and bones and stones and feathers and all sorts of things that I've collected in the African bush that I think, just provides an ambiance for me and keeps me in that sort of Zen kind of situation that I experienced when I was in the African bush. And there's nothing like being in the African bush to get a profound sense of healing. We originally, us humans, came from Africa, and I think it's still in our DNA, and I resonate with that. So, and that's why I called my book Forever in My Veins, because I resonate with that background. And so it's around me all the time, and I'm deeply, deeply respectful of it, and those people who practice it. In fact, it's so interesting that during the days of apartheid, these people who practiced this method of healing were frowned upon by whites. They would be dismissed. Oh, forget about them. They're just a witch doctor. Don't even pay any attention. But today in South Africa, it is a recognized form of healing by the Department of Health, and it's recognized as a healing session, as a healing system.
I did not know that. I did not know that it was recognized by the Department of Health. That's cool. Yeah, that is very cool. I did not know that, but that's very awesome. We do have a question in chat, and I don't know if you can answer it or not, but they want to know if you know how many different levels there are for being a shaman.
That's a difficult question. Yeah, you start off as an apprentice. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to answer this question in a satisfying manner to who posted that, but you start being an apprentice, and then you are attached to another shaman where you practice as their assistant, and slowly you rise up through the ranks. There are no terminologies that describe them or levels, if you like, but it's years and years. But there is a hierarchy. There is a system that they do follow before you can say, I alone can heal you, and come and see me. And of course, the degree of what some of the shamans can do, like, for example, speaking to deceased souls, people who have crossed over to the other side. That is another level of shamanism that not all of the sangomas can do. A lot of them are able to heal your illness. But if you really want to know about what grandma did in her life, they can do that too if they are skilled enough to communicate with the ancestors. And their paradigm is the shaman, the sangoma, speaks to his or her ancestors, or hears his or her ancestors. And it's the ancestors who are giving them the information. Everything in the African paradigm depends on the ancestors. Even if you want to go into another person's life or a deceased person's life, it's always through the ancestors. It's the shaman's ancestors, speaking to the ancestors of the person who has passed away. And that's how that information is passed down into the physical world. It's pretty fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And, I did a wonderful series in the 70s called The Tribal Identity, which looked at all the tribes of South Africa for television.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a sequence at a sacred lake. There's a tribe called the Venda in South Africa. They live right at the northern end of South Africa. And the Venda are very, very deeply, deeply spiritual people. And their background is kind of strange and obscure. We don't really know where the tribe originally came from. But their homeland is, wherever you go, there's always some kind of belief that the ancestors are around. They will have a plant in the forecourt of their hut, which symbolizes the ancestral spirits. And they go and talk to that plant. And then thereby communicating with their ancestors. But once I forget if it's 5 or 10 years, they used to, I'm not sure if they still do it today, but in the 70s they did. They used to give an offering to the great ancestral spirit of the tribe. And there's a sacred lake that no one was allowed to go to. But we had permission to go and film there with an old priest. He was an ancient guy. He must have been at least in his 90s or 100 years old. And he communicated with the ancestral spirits of this sacred lake. And was the most extraordinary experience of my life. And I have to tell you an interesting thing is that is the very, very first time that I experienced how the ancestors directly influence events in the physical world. For example, we had a host who was an anthropologist who was presenting the series, and he was in camera, and in the background was the ceremony going on. But the host, we had to take off our shoes because it's holy ground. You go barefoot. And our host, our anthropologist, stubbed his toe, and he was sort of around like this, So the assistant sound recorder started to giggle, and it's like wildfire, Then the sound recorder started to giggle, and I started to giggle, and eventually we were all sort of, trying to stifle our laughter. But the ceremony, the sacred ceremony, was going on in the background. And the old priest who was performing the ceremony, he could not possibly have heard us, but he stopped his chanting over the waters. And he just turned towards us. He turned around and looked at us and stared at us. And at the minute he did that, the camera stopped running, the sound recorder stopped running, no power. Electricity just died in all of our equipment. And I said to our host, we stopped laughing immediately. And I said to our host, Peter Becker, a wonderful anthropologist, I said to him, Peter, something really weird is going on here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he said, definitely. And I said to our fixer, who was the local guy, from the local tribe, I said, can you please ask the priest if he could explain to us why our equipment has stopped working? And he went to the priest. The priest was just standing there, staring at us, way down there. And he went and he came back and he said, the priest says that the ancestors, the spirits, are upset about your behavior and they don't want you to photograph this sequence anymore. That's why your equipment has stopped. Oh. I said, please convey our profound apologies. It was not intentional. Mm-hmm. We were not being disrespectful. It will not happen again. We are very, very sorry that this happened. Mm-hmm. Let's ask the priest to offer our apologies to the great spirit and the ancestral spirit and allow us to continue. This happens only once every 10 years. Mm-hmm. It's a sequence that I've got to get on film.
Right.
I went back to the old priest and whispered in his ear. He came back and he said, the priest said he will ask the ancestors. And the old man turned around and he looked out at the lake and he put his hands up like this and he started to chant. The minute he did that, power was restored. Our tape recorder wheels started to spin. My camera started to work. Remember, we were shooting on film and tape, and suddenly everything is working again. It was amazing.
Oh, wow.
Whatever blockage existed was lifted.
Oh, my God. That's crazy. That kind of ties into a little bit into a question we had that popped up into chat here. They wanted to know if it was hard making the film when you were filming the shamans, and I want to put on a spin on it. Were they accepted of that? Did they accept you filming them, doing their practices as well?
Yes, absolutely. In the 70s, when I did the series, we always asked permission. We were always very respectful, and we would never do anything without appropriate permission. Mm-hmm. Everything was always okayed by, and usually by the chief of the village or the headman or whatever, and the shaman, him or herself. And the case of this ceremony at the sacred lake, Lake Fundutsi, it's called, by the way, in Venderland. Of course, we absolutely, got them weeks before we arrived there. It was all arranged. So yeah, we were totally accepted. I'm not sure whether the same situation would apply today, because South Africa has a different mood, and things have changed a lot, and the role of white filmmakers digging into the lives of tribal ancestral beliefs may not always be the right thing to do. So I'm not sure whether it's possible today. But there's some amazing documentaries coming out of South Africa now that are extraordinary. But yeah, you don't do anything without permission. In fact, I don't do anything. If I go to foreign cultures anywhere in the world, I always make absolutely sure that everybody is okay with it, they're cool with it, they've given us their okay.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah. I mean, I would assume that, yeah, you'd have to get permission. And, when I watch some of those shows with like Josh Gates and things, when they go over to the foreign countries and they're going into like this sacred tomb or whatever, they always get permission. So that's just, I was wondering, when they're doing those practices, if they were okay with you filming it, but.
Yeah, no, you have to do that. In fact, if I go to a territory, an area, like, for example, there are a lot of, in Scotland, people may know about these rings of stone that exist. Mm-hmm. They're all over the place. And, they're mysterious. No one knows what they are or who put them there or what their purpose was. Mm-hmm. I will approach a place like that, and I will do a little meditation first before I go there and start taking pictures or start filming. And I will say, whoever or whatever spiritual beings are here, are you okay with me being here? Are you okay with me filming this? And if I don't feel comfortable about that, then I don't take out the camera. But if I do, then I know I'm getting an okay from the other side. And then I will actually, take my camera out and do stuff. I did the same thing in Tahiti. There's some amazing sacred areas in Tahiti that I found deep in the bush, just gorgeous places. But, I wouldn't take pictures unless I felt that it was permission was given for me to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's one thing I read a little bit about this. It's kind of jumping on to another subject, but the film Beyond Death.
Yeah.
I found that very interesting with the two mothers.
Yes.
That were brought together. That was amazing. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. When I got that show to do, it was a 2-hour special. I forget the cable network. It might have been A&E. Uh-huh. It might have been Discovery. I don't remember. It was in the late 90s. I don't remember the exact cable network. But anyway, my brief was, no hocus pocus, no ooga booga bump in the night garbage. We want facts. We want science. Right. Mm-hmm. We want science. Don't give us any, that haunted house stuff. We want science. Go out and find what happens to the consciousness of a life form, a human being. Mm-hmm. What happens to the consciousness of a person at the demise of the human body? When the body dies, what happens to your consciousness?
Right.
And if one wants to put another word to consciousness, call it the spirit of the person, what happens to that? Does it go somewhere? What happens to the life force? I don't like to think of it as life, because life force is basically electrical. It's biological. We can understand it. Mm-hmm. But the consciousness exists outside of that reality. We know that much. Mm-hmm. There's an amazing guy called Robert Jean who ran an extraordinary unit at Princeton University called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Unit with a woman called Brenda Dunn, where we know without any hint of a doubt that consciousness has nothing to do with biological systems. It is a separate entity entirely. The Monroe Institute in Virginia proves the same thing. And people can Google these places, by the way. Monroe Institute is an amazing institution in the mountains of Virginia where people go and you basically can leave your body. You can travel. You can travel. It happens. It's not ooga booga. It's for real. Mm-hmm. And so my task was, to go and find out cases, find examples that prove that there is more after the body is gone, after the body is dead. Still more left. So one of the stories that we found were about these two mothers, and it is an amazing story.
Mm-hmm.
They did not know one another. Each of them had a teenage son.
Mm-hmm.
One, the teenage son was killed. He used to ride his motorcycle
Mm-hmm.
Through a forest. He lived in New Jersey, and there was a forest not far from where he lived. And one day he was riding his motorcycle there with his buddies, and they didn't know that someone had strung a cable across this pathway that they used to use for some reason or another. And he went right into it, and he was decapitated.
Oh, wow.
So that's that one.
Mm-hmm.
Other mother, she had a son who died on the operating table during surgery. He was very ill. I forget what his condition was, but he died in surgery. And they were about the same age, these two guys. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's what's so amazing. One day, the one mother, the mother whose son was killed in the motorcycle accident, dreamed that her son comes to visit her. And he's standing at the front door, he's knocking at the door, and he's got a friend with him. And she says to him, in the dream, she says to him, "Who's your friend?" And he gives the name of, he said, "Oh, this is, let's say, Alan." I don't exactly know.
Mm-hmm.
"This is friend Alan.
Mm-hmm.
We've become friends." "Oh," says the mother, "that's very good. Come inside." And she says, "And then I dreamt that they came inside and I made them something to drink, and they had some of my baked pie or whatever it was. And then they left. And I woke up and I felt very emotional because it was so real."
Mm-hmm.
That's that. Now I cut to the other one. The other one says, one night she has a dream where her son, who died in surgery, comes to see her with a friend.
Uh-huh.
And he says to her son, "Who's this?" And her son says, "Oh, I'm going to call him Mike. This is my friend Mike. We've met, and we're good buddies now, and we go around, we hang around together."
Mm-hmm.
And says the mother, and that was her dream.
Mm-hmm.
It was so amazing, and it took a long, long time for this to actually come to a head.
Mm-hmm.
The two mothers were dreaming about each other's sons.
That's amazing.
Seeing one another in dreams.
Mm-hmm.
I actually filmed the two mothers getting together when it was finally discovered that they were dreaming about each other's sons, and what they dreamt of and what they saw in their dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Their own son's buddy was exactly what that other mother's son looked like and behaved like.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
They were exactly the same people in the spirit world. And these two mothers had these dreams. And we photographed their meeting where they got together for the first time. There's these two mothers, and I think it was in the mother in New Jersey. And they went into her house and they took out the photograph album, and she shows her photographs of her son and said, yes, that's the one I saw in my dream. That's who my son Mike introduced me to. That's your son, It's amazing.
Oh, that is absolutely amazing and wild how those things can happen like that and how the mind works. It's a mystery for sure.
And the thing is that there's so much more than we know. And
right.
That's the adventure and the journey of life that I have found that makes this world so extraordinary, that we can keep uncovering these things. There is so much more, than the garden gate or the front door to explore and learn. There's so much weird stuff out there. It's amazing. And I just wanted to encourage people to think that way and to open up their minds to the possibility. Don't believe everything you hear, and certainly don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Exactly.
But do research and dig and find, because there's so much more, to give us hope, because there's so much more than the life around us it's not that. There's more. I end the book by saying that I really firmly believe this, because I've had proof of this over and over and over and over again. And I think that I see it like a kind of science fiction. I describe it like, those bumper cars at the fairground.
Yep.
With the thing sticking up the back, touching a chicken wire roof where they get the car.
Yep.
Well, I think we've all got something like that, sticking up, touching a chicken wire. I think we're all connected to an invisible grid that connects all of us. And as I say in the book, I said, whether you're a person or a pony or a petunia,
Yeah.
We are all interconnected with the same universal cosmic grid.
Mm-hmm.
We are one,
Mm-hmm.
no matter who and what you are. And it doesn't matter. I don't think it depends on which planet you live in. And I don't think it really depends on where you are in the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
But it is this cosmic grid, and we're all connected to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And while you're kind of talking about that, you have a part where you talk about a UFO.
Yeah.
Which is
kind
of wild.
Yeah. Well, I think the time is coming, and recently the Pentagon released some papers.
Yes. Yep.
But, well, that's not even 1% of what they really know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We first of all, to even have the presumption and the audacity to think that we're alone is outrageous. It just shows narrow-minded, ignorance. We can't possibly be alone. We now know that there are over 4,000 what they call exoplanets that exist that are Earth-like. In other words, in the Goldilocks zone, in the ideal distance from their stars. One or two or three or four of them out of the thousands, and they're probably billions, support life.
Right.
And I don't have any doubt whatsoever that some of those, civilizations or species or whatever you want to call them are way, way, way ahead of us. It has to be. We cannot possibly be alone. The universe is way too big and way too vast and way too complicated for it to be that simple. There are a lot of life forms all over the universe. No doubt about it. I think that, and so I think UFOs, or the new term is UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. It's been with us for centuries. If you look at some of the ancient paintings or those what do you call them? Those things that you hang on the wall, embroideries, whatever else. Yes. In Europe, a lot of them depict things in the sky. And you look at Asian art. If you go to Angkor Wat, for example, these strange devices that are called vimanas in the Mahabharata, they're there. They're depicted. They're carved into the stone of the wall. And there are images on temple walls in Saqqara in Egypt that depict round objects in the sky. So these things have been around for a long, long time. There's no question about it. And I think that whoever the authorities are, whether it's us or whether it's the Russians or whether it's the Chinese or whatever, they know more than they're telling us. And I think it's time that they come clean and tell us what they know.
Exactly.
Because we need to know.
Right.
We need to. And so I had my first interesting experience about a UFO. I was living in Canada at the time. This was 1966. After I left Zambia, Central Africa, I went back to South Africa for a while. I was for a couple of years, and then I emigrated to Canada. And I was working for the National Film Board in Montreal. And one of the documentaries I worked on was a history of housing in Canada. How housing development started. And Canada's huge, and the prairie states are flat and vast, and how and why do little towns begin to grow in certain areas. So that was what the documentary was about. Anyway, so we were in the province of Alberta, and we were staying one night at a tiny little motel in the middle of these cornfields, and the world was flat like a tabletop. And because we were going to work at a potash plant the next day, where they get potash out of the ground, which they use in fertilizers and various stuff.
Right.
The reason why we were going there was because a town was beginning to grow. So we wanted to use that as an example of, catalyst of why an urban area would begin to grow. And the next morning, it was just a small crew, three of us, driving from this motel for miles and miles and miles to get to this potash plant. And you could see the plant because there was this white plume of smoke, of dust really coming up out of this pit where they were digging the stuff out of the ground. And when we got to the gate of the plant, the guy at the gate said, "You guys go down to the head office as quick as you can and see if you can, if you've got any instruments, to see if you can see what's up in that white cloud up there, because there's something up there." So I wasn't directly. The director said, "Like what?" He said, "We don't know what it is, but there's something up there. There's something in that cloud."
Oh my
Really?
gosh.
Yeah. So we drove down to the parking lot,
Uh-huh.
and the director meets the manager of the plant, and they have their introductory talks, and the guy says, "We told that there's something in the cloud up there," and the manager says, "Yeah, I haven't seen it myself, but some people have told me that there's something up there." So the director says to me, "Set up the camera, put on the longest lens we have, a telephoto lens, see if you can see anything." While I, finish this conversation inside and have a cup of coffee with the manager, which I did. So I set up the camera, and there's a couple of people came, wandering over to me from the plant, and stood standing around smoking a cigarette, whatever. And I have this long telephoto lens on this, and I'm seeing nothing. And then a little breeze comes up, and the guy with the cigarette says, "Oh, look, there it is, there it is." And I said, "What?" And I looked up, and there was a glint of something metallic. And I panned over and got a clear shot of where it was. And there was a breeze that came up, and the smoke or dust or whatever dissipated. And there was this disc just sitting in the sky.
Oh, wow.
And I ran film. Remember, we're shooting film back in the good old days. And I'm running film. I'm photographing this thing. And I ran about, a couple of minutes worth, and nothing happened. And then the smoke came back, and that was it. There was this object just sitting in the sky. No sound, no appearance of any form of propulsion, no windows, nothing. Oh my gosh. And so when we at the end of the day, the director said to me, take that roll of film that when you shot that thing, separate it from the rest of the stuff, and just tell them to hold it for us. So when we get back to Montreal and look at the dailies of the show, we can see if we can make any sense out of it. So a couple of weeks later, we get back to Montreal, and we're sitting through hours and hours and hours of very boring dailies of, towns being built and, farms and factories and things like that. And at the end of it, the projector yells from the projectionist at the back. He says, "What about this reel? You want to run it?" And I said, "What?" He said, "The one that you said, strange objects." I said, "Yeah, put it on." So now we've got a number of people sitting in the theater with us. The head of the camera department and a few other people from the Department of Housing. And we put this thing on the screen, and there is this object as clear as can be. There is a flying saucer-like object sitting in this white cloud without any question.
Oh, my gosh.
And so, there was a sort of banter in the room. What do we do with it? What do we do? It was the time where Project Blue Book was still in existence. A lot of folks who are into UFOs will know about that. And so we had it sent to them, to the U.S. Air Force, Project Blue Book, and I think in Dayton, in Ohio. And, a couple of weeks went by, and nothing. We get no word back. We're with our business. We've all got our agendas. We've got other things to do. But one day I was at the studio at the National Film Board office, and I go to the camera department, and I said to the woman who runs the office there, I said, "Frankie, did we ever hear back from those folks in the States about that object, that film that we sent?" She said, no, I'm going to call them tomorrow. So the next day she says, I went up to her office, and she said, "I called them this morning. And you know what they told me?" I said, "No." She said, "What film?"
Oh my gosh.
That they got it because they signed for it.
Right, exactly.
It's before the days of FedEx and before the days of UPS, but we know that they got it, and they signed for it, and they completely dismissed the fact that they received anything from us at all. So, is there a cover-up? You betcha. There was, and there is a cover-up.
Definitely. Eventually it'll come out. One way or the other. Eventually. Hopefully.
One would definitely hope so. It's time,
Yes, it is.
There's nothing to be afraid of. I'm quite sure that there are many, many species. They're probably not all nice. Some of them may be dangerous, but I don't think we're under threat. You think of every UFO film or every space invader type movie that you've seen. And I used to see them all when I was a kid, the matinees in the 50s and the 60s, lousy B movies, about being invaded from outer space monsters, And of course, the creatures from outer space were always the baddies. So the first thing that happens is the army arrives, and,
Yep.
So there's a war on, and we still have that mentality as though we are under threat.
Yep.
And we've got to get over that.
Yep, we do. We do, absolutely. Before we wrap things up, There's a question. One of our listeners, he asked it to every guest. He wants to know, what is the one thing in the world that you would not want to be haunted?
That I would not want to be haunted?
Uh-huh.
Is he referring to a place or
like an object? Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good question. He asks of all of your...
Yes, all the guests, yep.
It's a running question.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, first of all, ghosts and spirits and entities are real. They're everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They always will be. And some of them may be malevolent and some of them may be benevolent. We don't know.
Right.
But if we're talking about a malevolent or an evil or a dark force,
mm-hmm.
they certainly could be anywhere. And I wouldn't like my office to be haunted because I wouldn't be able to write anymore.
Right. Yeah.
That's true.
That's a good one. That is a good one. Yes. I think I've
got enough stuff in here to keep those away. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Okay, so where can our listeners purchase your book? And I know we already had a listener. They already said that they were in chat and they already purchased your book during the show. So, but
great.
But where
it's
can they get it?
From most booksellers. Barnes & Noble carry it, and it's on Amazon.com. You can buy hard copy or you can buy the ebook version, but it's carried by Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And Barnes & Noble online or a physical bookstore, they all carry it.
Okay.
You can get it everywhere. It's available all over the world.
And what are your social medias that they can follow you on to see what you're up to?
If folks go to my website is basically my name. And do you want me to spell that out?
I got it.
You got it.
Yep.
It's my website. It says www.lionelfriedberg.com. That's my website. And at that website, they can actually see exactly where to get the book. They can order it from there. And it tells them a bunch of other stuff that I've done as well, which they may find interesting.
Okay.
So lionelfriedberg.com is what I would suggest folks do.
Perfect. I put it in our chat too, but I'll post it on our social medias as well. So that way people that'll catch up later, they can come to our pages and find the information for you as well. I mean, this was absolutely amazing.
I know they said an hour wasn't long
I
enough.
know all our listeners are like, an hour's not long enough. And it's like, I have to get up early and go to work. Otherwise, I'd be on here longer. But we'll have to have him on again. Yes, we'll have to have you back on again for a part 2 to see what you're up to.
Anytime. I'd be delighted to do that. And, let people send in questions. I'll be happy to answer if I can.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So if anybody has any more questions, feel free to get in touch with Kim or I, and we can pass them on, or you can find Lionel too. You have Instagram.
Yes. I have Instagram and there's Facebook, and all of those are accessible through my website. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So go to his website. You can find him there. If you have any questions, you can ask him, or you can send them to us as well. I just give quick shout out to everybody who was in chat tonight. We had Kim, we had Matt, we had Darren, Nico, and Allie. Thank you to those that were participating in chat tonight. Thank you for the ones that were not participating in chat, but we could see you up there. We appreciate each and every one of you. Like to say thanks to our special guest tonight, Lionel. It was a pleasure. Very interesting things. I can't wait to have you back on to hear some more of your stories. I mean, they're just absolutely amazing. Everybody in chat is saying it was very amazing. So,
well, I'm delighted to share it with everybody. So thanks everybody for listening and for putting up. And I appreciate being on the show with you guys. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. And we'll be on next week. We have special guest Haunted Kentucky. We'll see what they're up to on their paranormal investigations. So make sure you check that out as well. Thanks, everybody, and have a good night.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to REP Paranormal and Friends. Be sure to check out Kim and Allison on Facebook at REP Paranormal Busters.